the Jesus Disciples Seminary textbooks can be ordered from Amazon. Do a search for Jesus Disciples Seminary. Lesson 8. The Moral Government of God. Back in the 1880s, the Lord raised up a man by the name of Charles G. Finney that gave Christianity its first look at the moral government of God in his lectures, and later a book that presented God in a logical unfolding that challenged the minds and hearts of the people that heard him and read his writings. Thousands upon thousands were saved in Finney's revivals as conviction would bring them to their knees and prostrate on the floors of meeting halls, churches, and schoolrooms. Finney preached truth in logical order, in spite of being constantly challenged by others in the ministry. Finney noted that organized religion of his day did not define their terms, were vague about doctrine, and in general were unable to handle the Word of God skillfully in approaching the lost sinners of the world. Towards the end of his life, 1885, Finney started a college in Ohio to try and teach men for the ministry. The basic preparation centered around the moral government of God, the understanding of how, what, where, and when of God's working with the universe, animals, and man. Most of the material in this part 2 is taken from Finney's book on systematic theology, which was re-edited by Harry Kahn and published in paperback form and printed by Bethany Fellowship out of Minneapolis. Harry Kahn himself was a great student of Finney and was a great preacher and teacher of the moral government of God. Kahn was introduced to Finney's work by Gordon Olson of Chicago. Olson was perhaps one of the greatest teachers of this systematic study of moral government. See Part 1 of this course, which is taken from Olson's book The Truth Shall Make You Free. Moral law. Moral making reference to a being with a free will, free choice, that can originate selections, choices, of right and wrong. Law is a rule of action, whether intelligent or unintelligent, whether free or forced. Law can be broken down into two main parts. Physical law is the law of the material universe. Moral law is a rule for moral action with rewards for keeping the moral laws and punishment for disobedience to them. It is the rule for the government of free and intelligent action and choice. The drawings on the following pages will help to visualize the concepts of moral law and the two types of law, moral and physical. Moral law can be thought of as a set of responsibilities that need to be accepted. When one chooses to accept or reject one's responsibilities under moral law, then sanctions or consequences result. These consequences for disobedience or obedience are penalties or rewards under the moral law. Listed above are some of the penalties and rewards human beings experience under God's moral government. Due to man's free will, God governs his kingdom by imparting truth in love to his subjects, humans. Persuasion and influence, by revealing the various penalties and rewards as part of the truth messages, help to guide the subjects to what is best for everyone involved. Law is a rule of action. God's kingdom has moral law and physical law. Moral law operates over free, intelligent agents to allow them free, intelligent actions. This results in liberty with free moral choices unless God's providential override comes into play. Physical law governs everything else in the material universe. Necessary unintelligent action operates by necessity and force. Physical law has two components, animate and inanimate, explained in next section. The Kingdom of God. Psalms 103 verse 19. The Lord hath prepared his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom ruleth over all. Page 328, text only will be given here. See the Jesus Disciples Seminary Book Course 7, The Moral Government of God, for material on pages 329 to 332 for the rest of the non-moral government of God scriptures. Non-moral government. A government of animate creation, not endowed with free moral agency, by means of internal impulse or tendency, and of the vast natural creation not possessing the life of growth or self-locomotion by means of dynamic energy or divine omnipotence, the law of cause and effect functioning in both areas. Certainty is the law of God's operations here, the cause being brought into existence, the result always follows. Animate non-moral. Here the mysterious law of instinct becomes a compelling directive, which must be supplemented by direct divine impulses to stimulate man to God consciousness, judging from the phenomenal things that are taking place that exhibit more intelligence in certain details than man possesses. Genesis 9 verse 2. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea, into your hand are they delivered. Numbers 11:31. And there went forth a wind from the Lord, and brought quails from the sea, and let them fall by the camp, as it were a day's journey on this side, and as it were a day's journey on the other side, round about the camp, and as it were 2 cubits high upon the face of the earth. Numbers 22:22-23. 22. And God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his ass, and his 2 servants were with him. 23. And the ass saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and the ass turned aside out of the way, and went into the field, and Balaam smote the ass, to turn her into the way. Inanimate. God in omnipotence holds absolute sway over the vast realm of material creation by producing an adequate cause for every desired effect. God creates his great power and exercises perfect control according to his ever-wise benevolence. Genesis 6 verses 7 and 13. 7. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man, and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. 13. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and, behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Genesis 9 verse 11. And I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. Genesis 19 verses 24-25. 24. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. 25. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. Page 333. Text only will be given here. See the Jesus Disciples Seminary Book Course 7, The Moral Government of God for material on pages 334-336 for the rest of the Moral Government of God Scriptures. Moral Government. A government of free moral agents by motives presented to the mind for the will to make choice between, except for necessary providential interruptions of this normal moral freedom to maintain a tolerable world order and accomplish certain divine plans, all of which was made necessary by the entrance of sin into the world with the impending chaos resulting from selfishness. Free moral action. The normal course of accountable, self-caused action, where man is allowed to choose between motives presented to the mind to form his own moral character and be sole author of his destiny. Here God says, I have called, and ye refused, I have stretched my hand, and no man regarded. Proverbs 1 verse 24. Genesis 3 verse 11. And he said, Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree, whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat? Genesis 6 verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Deuteronomy 24 verse 15. At his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. Joshua 24 verse 15. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land ye dwell, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. 1 Kings 18 verse 21. And Elijah came unto all the people, and said, How long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Governmental providence. The abnormal or unusual operation of God's wisdom in inciting men's wills to actions in various particulars through external events or internal persuasion, temporarily setting aside man's normal moral freedom and accountability under a law of cause and effect by forcing or constraining man's will. Exodus 11 verses 9 to 10. 9 And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. 10 And Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, so that he would not let the children of Israel go out of his land. Deuteronomy 2 verse 25. This day will I begin to put the dread of thee and the fear of thee upon the nations that are under the whole heaven, who shall hear report of thee, and shall tremble, and be in anguish because of thee. Joshua 11 verse 20. For it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, that they should come against Israel in battle, that he might destroy them utterly, and that they might have no favor, but that he might destroy them, as the Lord commanded Moses. Psalms 22 verse 28. For the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among the nations. Psalm 66 verse 7. He ruleth by his power forever, his eyes behold the nations, let not the rebellious exalt themselves. Selah. Attributes and characteristics of moral law. 1. It must be personal. It must be developed in the spirit mind of each free moral agency. 2. It must be objective. Attributes and characteristics of moral law. 1. It must be personal. It must be developed in the spirit mind of each free moral agency. 2. It must be objective. It must be regarded as a rule of duty prescribed by the supreme lawgiver, and outside of, or external, to one's own self. 3. It must be in the form of liberty instead of necessity. It should state what a free moral agent ought to choose, will, and intend. It must not, cannot, possess any element or attribute of force. That would place it in physical law. 4. It must fit free moral agents, their nature, and makeup. In other words, it must be custom-made, and be a custom fit to the very nature that God has given us. Nothing more or nothing less. 5. It must be universal. The conditions and circumstances being the same, it requires, and must require, of all free moral agents, the same things. 6. It must be impartial. Moral law is no respecter of persons. It demands one thing for all. This does not mean the same outward conduct for all, but the same state of heart in all. 7. It must be practical. That which is demanded by moral law must be possible to the agent. Anything which demands a natural impossibility is not, and cannot be, moral law. 8. It must be independent. Moral law does not, and cannot originate in the will of God. As a law, it is entirely independent of his will just as his own existence is. It is obligatory also upon every moral agent, entirely independent of the will of God. 9. It must be unchangeable. Whatever the nature of the moral agent is, his capacity and relations are, entirely conformity to just that nature, those capacities and relations, so far as he is able to understand them, is required at every moment, and nothing more or less. If capacity is enlarged, the subject is not thereby rendered capable of doing more than the law demands, for the law still, as always, requires the full consecration of his whole being to the public interests. If by any means whatever, his ability is abridged, moral law, always and necessarily consistent with itself, still requires that what is left, nothing more or less, shall be consecrated to the same end as before. 10. It must have unity. Moral law has but one ultimate goal, to God and to all moral agents. It is expressed in one word, love or benevolence. Moral law is the idea of perfect, universal, and constant consecration of the whole being to the highest good of being. It is a state of heart and a course of life exactly suited to the nature and relations of free moral agents. This is the only true definition of moral law. 11. It must be expedient. Advisable, advantageous, wise. A revealed law or commandment is never to be set aside by our views of expediency. We may know with certainty that what is required is expedient. Moral law proposes the highest good of universal being as it is, and requires all moral agents to consecrate themselves to the promotion of this end. Consequently, expediency must be one of its attributes. Expediency and right are always and necessarily at one. 12. It is exclusive. Moral law is the only possible rule of moral obligation, oughtness. There can be no other rule of action for moral agents but moral law, or the law of benevolence/love. Every other rule is absolutely excluded by the very nature of moral law. Moral government summary. Why government? The primary idea of government is that of direction, guidance, control by, or in accordance with, rule or law. The kinds of government. All government is, and must be, either moral or physical. What is physical government? It is the control, exercised by a law of necessity or force. What is moral government? It is the government of free will. It presides over and controls or seeks to control the actions of the free will. It is a government of motive. It also includes the dispensation of rewards and punishment. See previous drawing of sanctions, page 326. Why moral government? 1. No one has a right to prescribe rules for and control the conduct of another, unless there is some good reason for his doing so. 2. The universe is dependent upon moral government as a means of securing the highest good. 3. This dependence is a good and sufficient reason for the existence of moral government. 4. Moral government is a necessity of moral beings, and therefore right. Example: no community can perfectly harmonize in all their views and feelings, without perfect knowledge, or some degree of knowledge on which all subjects are called to act. But no community ever existed, or will exist, in which all possess exactly the same amount of knowledge, and thus it would be impossible for them to agree in all their thoughts, views, and opinions. There must, therefore, be in every community some standard or rule of duty, to which all the subjects of the community are to conform themselves. There must be some head or controlling mind, whose will shall be law, and whose decision shall be regarded as infallible by all the subjects of the government. 1. This will must be one of authority, and not merely advising subjects. 2. There must of necessity be a penalty attached to, and incurred by, every act of disobedience to this will. 3. The good, then, of the universe requires that there should be a moral governor. Whose right is it to govern? A being whose attributes, physical and moral, best qualify him to secure the ultimate end of government. God has the qualifications to be a moral governor because 1. Of our own nature. God is holy. He made us in His image. Therefore, He requires us to be holy. 2. His natural attributes qualify Him to maintain the relation of a moral governor to the universe. 3. His moral character also qualifies Him to sustain this relation. 4. His relation to the universe as creator and preserver confers on Him the right of universal government. 5. He is obligated. It would be wrong for Him to create a universe of moral beings and then refuse or neglect to administer over them a moral government, since government is a necessity of their nature and relations. 6. His happiness must demand it. He couldn't be happy unless He acted in accordance with His conscience. 7. If God is not a moral governor, He is not wise. Wisdom consists in the choice of the best ends and the use of the best means to reach that end. 8. The conduct or providence of God plainly indicates a design to exert a moral influence over moral agents. 9. The Bible, which has been proved to be a revelation from God, contains a most simple and yet comprehensive system of moral government. 10. If we are deceived in respect to our being subjects of moral government, we are sure of nothing. What is implied in the right to govern? 1. The right to govern implies the necessity of government, as a means of securing a valuable end. 2. The right to govern implies the duty, or obligation, to govern. 3. The right to govern implies obligation on the part of the subject to obey. It cannot be the right or duty of the governor to govern, unless it is the duty of the subject to obey. The governor and subjects are alike dependent upon this government. The one must seek to govern, the other must submit to be governed. 4. The right to govern implies the right and duty to dispense just and necessary rewards and punishments. Distribute rewards proportion to merit and penalties proportion to demerit. 5. It implies obligation, on the part of the subject, in case of disobedience, to submit to merited punishment, and also, if necessary, to aid in the inflection of the penalty of law. 6. It implies obligation, on the part both of the ruler and the ruled, to make any personal and private sacrifice demanded by the higher public good. It must always be understood that present voluntary sacrifices shall have an ultimate reward, present or future, eternal. 7. It implies the right and duty to employ any degree of force which is needed to maintain order, the execution of wholesome laws, the suppression of insurrections, the punishment of rebels and disorganizers, and sustaining the supremacy of moral law. What are the limits of this right to govern? Remember, the right to govern is founded upon the fact that the highest good of moral agents cannot be secured but by means of government. 1. Unless there is some necessity for government, the fact that God created the universe can give him no right to govern it. 2. The fact that God is the owner and sole proprietor of the universe is no reason why he should govern it. Ownership cannot confer the right to govern. 3. The right to govern cannot be founded in the fact that God possesses all the attributes necessary to govern. This is no doubt a condition. For however well qualified he may be to govern, still, unless government is necessary to secure his own glory and the highest well-being of the universe, he has no right to govern it. 4. The human intelligence cannot say that God has a right to govern, because he has such a right, and that this is reason enough, and all the reason that can be given. Conclusions. 1. Government is necessary to the highest good of the universe. 2. Unnecessary laws, rules, etc., are invalid laws, rules, etc. 3. In the government of God, the sovereign, and not the subject, is to be the judge of what is necessary laws and government. 4. Under no government, therefore, are laws to be despised or rejected because we are unable to see at once their necessity, and hence their wisdom. 5. In the government of God there can never be any doubt, nor of course any ground, for distrust and hesitation as it respects the duty of obedience. All of the Jesus Disciples Seminary textbooks can be ordered from Amazon. Do a search for Jesus Disciples Seminary.